Olivia Martin sat on the edge of her bed, her fingers gripping the silky folds of her white wedding gown. The reality of the day weighed heavily on her chest. She was about to marry a man she barely knew, a man chosen for her by her parents. Her mother, Victoria Martins, had made it clear this marriage was necessary for their family's reputation and future. The groom, Adrian Cole, was a highly respected young military officer from an influential family. He was quiet, reserved, and, according to her father, the kind of man who commands respect without saying a word. But Olivia didn't want a husband chosen for her. She wanted love, passion, and a whirlwind romance. Instead, she was getting duty, expectation, and a man whose emotions were locked away behind a military mask. The wedding ceremony was grand, elegant, and picture-perfect, but Olivia felt none of it. As she walked down the aisle, her heart pounded in rebellion. When she reached Adrian, she dared to look into his eyes. They were deep brown, serious, and unreadable. His posture was stiff, his hands steady as he slipped the ring onto her finger. "With this ring I thee wed," he said, his voice steady but devoid of emotion. Olivia swallowed hard. "With this ring I thee wed." As the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Adrian leaned in and pressed a brief, formal kiss on her lips. It was nothing more than a brush, like a whisper of duty. That night, as they sat in their lavish new home, the silence stretched between them. Olivia watched Adrian as he unbuttoned his military jacket, revealing the toned muscles beneath his white shirt. He looked every bit the strong soldier her parents had described, intimidating, disciplined, and unreadable. "I know you didn't want this," Adrian finally spoke, his voice deep and calm. Olivia folded her arms. "And what about you? Did you want this?" His gaze met hers, unreadable as ever. "What I want doesn't matter. Duty comes first." A cold chill ran down Olivia's spine. If that was all she was to him, just a duty, how could she ever hope to find happiness in this marriage? Little did she know, fate had a different plan for them. Olivia woke up to the soft hum of the air conditioner, the morning sunlight seeping through the curtains of their grand bedroom. She turned her head slightly to the other side of the massive bed. Empty. Adrian was gone. She sat up, running a hand through her tousled hair, feeling a pang of frustration. He hadn't even bothered to wake her or say anything before leaving. Did he plan to keep treating this marriage like a mere obligation? A sharp knock on the door startled her. "Madam, breakfast is ready," a female voice called from outside. Olivia sighed. Of course, everything in this house ran like a military operation, just like its owner. Draping a robe over her nightdress, she made her way downstairs to the dining room, where she found Adrian already seated at the long table. His posture was upright, his expression neutral as he sipped his coffee. "Good morning," she muttered, pulling out a chair. "Morning," he replied curtly. She frowned. That was it? Just morning? No attempt at conversation, no warmth. Determined to break the ice, she tried again. "So, you wake up early?" Adrian nodded, cutting into his toast. "Military training. Habit." "Right. Of course. He probably saw her as nothing more than a civilian he was forced to cohabit with. Trying to push down her irritation, she continued. "How long will you be in Lagos before your next deployment?" "A few weeks," he said simply, not offering any further details. Her grip tightened on her fork. "Do you always give one-word answers?" At this, Adrian finally looked at her, his dark eyes studying her face. "I don't talk much." "Yeah, I noticed," she muttered under her breath. A tense silence followed before Adrian spoke again, his voice measured. "I understand this isn't what you wanted, but I believe in respecting this marriage, even if it's arranged." Olivia scoffed, folding her arms. "Respect? You barely talk to me." Adrian set his fork down and leaned back slightly. "Talking isn't the only form of respect." That shut her up. He finished his meal, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and stood up. "I have training today. I'll be back late." And just like that, he walked out, leaving Olivia fuming. She hated how unreadable he was. How could she live with a man who gave nothing away? She had dreamed of a marriage filled with warmth, affection, and laughter, but instead she was stuck with a man who treated her like a formality. One thing was certain. She refused to be invisible in her own marriage. If Adrian Cole thought he could keep her at arm's length, he was in for a surprise. Little did she know, fate was about to throw them into a storm neither of them saw coming. Days passed, and the cold formality between Olivia and Adrian remained unchanged. He was either at his military base or locked away in his study. When they did see each other, their conversations were brief, and Olivia found herself growing more frustrated by the day. She wasn't the type of woman who could exist in silence. She needed warmth, connection, something more than just two strangers sharing a house. One evening, as Olivia sat in the grand living room scrolling through her phone, she heard the front door open. Adrian stepped in, looking sharp in his military uniform, his presence commanding even in silence. She watched as he removed his cap, his dark hair slightly tousled from the day. He was undeniably handsome, but that didn't change the fact that he was emotionally distant. "You're home early," she noted, crossing her legs. Adrian nodded. "Training ended sooner than expected." Silence stretched between them. "Are you always this quiet?" she finally asked, her voice laced with frustration. Adrian raised an eyebrow. "You ask that a lot." "Because it's annoying," she snapped, standing up. "Do you even realize we're married? Or do you see me as some housemate you just happen to be stuck with?" His expression remained unreadable. "I'm not used to this." "This," she echoed. "Marriage, living with someone, having to explain myself all the time," he admitted. His honesty took her by surprise, but it didn't make her any less frustrated. "Well, I'm not used to feeling invisible in my own home." Adrian sighed, as if debating whether to say more. Then, in a quieter voice, he added, "I don't mean to make you feel that way." It was the first glimpse of something real, something human. Olivia opened her mouth to say more, but before she could, Adrian's phone rang. His expression darkened as he answered. "Yes, sir." "Understood." When he ended the call, he turned to Olivia, his jaw tight. "I leave in 3 days," he said simply. Her stomach dropped. "What?" "My unit has been deployed. It's an urgent mission." Olivia's heart pounded. She had barely gotten to know him, and now he was leaving? For the first time since their wedding, the reality of Adrian's job truly hit her. He wasn't just some distant, unreadable man. He was a soldier, a man who could be sent into danger at any time. She stared at him, unsure of what to say, but one thought screamed in her mind. What if he never came back? Olivia barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind replayed Adrian's words. "I leave in 3 days." She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to push down the unfamiliar panic creeping into her chest. They may not have had the perfect marriage, but the thought of him leaving, of him walking into danger, felt unsettling in a way she wasn't ready to admit. By morning, Adrian was already dressed in his uniform, preparing for his final day at the base before deployment. Olivia sat up, watching him button his shirt with the same precision and discipline that defined him. "Where are you being sent?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. He glanced at her briefly before grabbing his watch. "Classified, of course. She should have expected that." "How long will you be gone?" she tried again. "A few months, maybe more." She swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the sheets. She wanted to ask more, to press him for details, but she knew it was useless. The military had its secrets, and Adrian was loyal to them. "Do you ever get scared?" she blurted out. That made him pause. He turned to her, studying her for a moment before answering. "Fear doesn't help a soldier survive. Discipline does." His words sent a chill down her spine. Adrian grabbed his cap and headed for the door, but something in Olivia snapped. Before she could stop herself, she got out of bed and rushed toward him. "Wait," he turned, slightly surprised. She hesitated, her heart hammering. "I know we're not close," she began carefully, "but just be careful, okay?" For a second, something flickered in Adrian's eyes, something unreadable but softer than usual. "I will," he said simply. Then, before she could process what she was doing, she reached forward and hugged him. It was brief, hesitant, and she half expected him to pull away, but he didn't. His body was tense at first, but after a moment she felt his hand rest lightly on her back. It wasn't much, but it was something. When she pulled away, he gave her a small nod, then turned and walked out. As the door shut behind him, Olivia stood frozen, realizing something terrifying. She didn't want Adrian to go, and worse, she wasn't sure why. The morning Adrian left, Olivia stood by the window, watching as his car disappeared down the street. She had told herself she wouldn't feel anything, that his departure wouldn't affect her. But as she stood there in silence, an emptiness settled over her chest. She sighed and turned away, catching sight of her reflection in the tall mirror across the room. Even with minimal effort, she was breathtaking. Her smooth, caramel-toned skin glowed in the morning light, her full lips naturally pink and inviting. Her deep brown eyes, framed by thick lashes, held a quiet intensity, and her long, wavy black hair cascaded over her shoulders like silk. Olivia had always been admired for her beauty. Strangers often stared, men tripped over their words, and women envied the effortless grace she carried. But for the first time in a long time, she felt unseen. Adrian hadn't once complimented her since their wedding. It shouldn't have bothered her. He wasn't the expressive type, but it did. Shaking off the thought, Olivia decided she wouldn't let his absence consume her. She would go about her life as she always had. But that was easier said than done. The house felt eerily quiet without him. She wasn't used to missing someone she barely knew, yet she found herself listening for his footsteps, expecting to hear his low voice. By the second week of his absence, she had grown restless. She spent time with friends, went shopping, even attended a charity gala where she was the centre of attention as always. Men whispered about her beauty, women stole jealous glances, and yet she felt nothing. Something was missing, or rather, someone. One evening, she sat in the living room, scrolling mindlessly through her phone when a message popped up. "Adrian, how are you?" Her heart skipped. It was the first time he had reached out since leaving. She hesitated before typing back. "I'm fine. You?" His reply was quick. "Alive." She rolled her eyes, typical Adrian. "Still giving one-word answers, I see." A pause. Then, "Still asking too many questions, I see." She smiled, actually smiled. For the first time since he left, she felt something other than frustration, and she wasn't sure what that meant. Over the next few weeks, Olivia and Adrian continued exchanging short messages. Their conversations were never deep, never romantic, but they were something. She would ask him how he was. He would say he was fine. She would tell him about her day. He would respond with dry humour that always caught her off guard. At first, she had thought he was cold, but now she realised he was just different, not the kind of man who spilled his emotions easily. And yet she could tell when he was being sincere, even in his few words. One evening, as she lounged in bed, her phone buzzed again. "Did you eat today?" She blinked at the screen, surprised. He had never asked her that before. "Yes, Dad." She smirked at her own response, but his reply came faster than she expected. "Good. That was it. Just one word." But for some reason it made warmth bloom in her chest. She shook her head. "What is wrong with me?" This was the same man who had treated their marriage like a military mission. The same man who had barely spoken on their wedding day. And yet, with every message, every small exchange, she felt something shifting. But then, one night, the messages stopped. For 3 days, there was nothing. No replies, no updates. She told herself not to panic. He was a soldier. Maybe he was busy. Maybe he was in an area without service. But the 4th day came. The 5th. Still nothing. She barely slept that night, staring at her phone, willing it to ring. And then at 2 a.m. it did. She grabbed it instantly. "Adrian?" There was silence on the other end. Then finally his voice, low and strained. "Olivia." She sat up, gripping the phone tighter. "Where have you been? I've been texting you." A pause. Then, "I was caught up in something." His voice sounded different, tired, rough. "Are you okay?" she asked, her heart pounding. Another pause. "I will be," he said at last. Something was wrong. She knew it. But she also knew Adrian. If he wasn't telling her, it was because he didn't want her to worry. And for the first time since he left, Olivia realised something terrifying. She was worried, more than she had any right to be, and she didn't know what to do about it. Olivia barely slept after that call. Adrian's voice had been different, off. He had always been reserved, but this time there was something else, something heavy. She tried to push it out of her mind, but the feeling lingered. The next morning, she sat in the garden, sipping tea, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. She debated calling him back, but she knew he wouldn't answer if he didn't want to talk. Still, she couldn't shake the unease curling in her stomach. By the 7th day of silence, she was restless. By the 10th, she was furious. She stormed into her mother's house, where Victoria Martin sat elegantly on the patio, sipping fresh juice. Her mother was a striking woman, known for her poise and sharp mind. Olivia had inherited her beauty, but not her cold practicality. "You look tense," Victoria observed, setting down her glass. Olivia crossed her arms. "Do you know how to get in touch with Adrian's commanding officer?" Victoria raised a perfectly arched brow. "Why?" "Because I haven't heard from my husband in 10 days, Olivia snapped. No texts, no calls, nothing. Her mother studied her carefully, a small smirk playing on her lips. "Since when do you care so much?" Olivia bristled. "I don't. He's my husband. I should at least know if he's okay." Victoria leaned back in her chair. "Adrian is a soldier, Olivia. He won't always be available to entertain your emotions." "It's not about entertainment, Mother," Olivia said through clenched teeth. "Something feels wrong." Victoria sighed, as if bored. "I'll see what I can find out." Olivia exhaled, tension still thick in her chest. She didn't know why she was feeling this way, why the thought of Adrian being hurt or worse made her stomach twist in ways she didn't understand. She told herself it was just concern. But deep down, a terrifying thought crept in. She missed him. Not just his messages, not just his presence in the house. She missed him. And that scared her more than anything else. 3 more days passed, 3 more days of silence. Olivia had never felt this restless before. She barely ate, barely slept, and checked her phone every hour, waiting for a message that never came. Then, on the evening of the 13th day, just as she was about to lose her mind, her phone rang. She grabbed it without hesitation. "Hello?" "Mrs. Cole?" a deep male voice asked. Her stomach dropped. It wasn't Adrian. "Yes, this is Olivia Cole," she said, gripping the phone tightly. "Who is this?" "This is Major Benson, Adrian's commanding officer." Olivia's breath caught. "I need you to come to the base," the major continued. "Your husband has been injured." The world around her blurred. "Injured?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "How bad?" There was a pause. "It's best if you come in person." Olivia's legs nearly gave out. She grabbed onto the couch for support. This couldn't be happening. She had spent so much time being frustrated with Adrian, wishing he would open up, that she had never considered the real danger of his job. "Mrs. Cole?" Major Benson's voice cut through her thoughts. "I'll be there," she managed, already reaching for her keys. She drove faster than she ever had in her life, barely stopping for traffic lights, her hands trembling on the wheel. When she arrived at the military hospital, a soldier escorted her inside. "Where is he?" she demanded, her heart racing. "This way, ma'am," the soldier said, leading her through the sterile white hallways. When they finally reached a private room, Olivia braced herself before stepping inside. The sight of Adrian lying on the hospital bed made her breath hitch. His left arm was wrapped in bandages, and there was a nasty cut across his forehead. He looked pale, exhausted, but alive. His dark eyes flickered open as she entered. For a moment he just stared at her, as if surprised to see her there. "You came," he said, his voice hoarse. A wave of emotions crashed over Olivia. Relief, anger, something else she didn't want to name. She swallowed hard. "Of course I came, you idiot." A faint smirk touched his lips. "You were worried about me." She exhaled sharply, walking closer to the bed. "What happened?" His smirk faded. "Classified mission. Things went sideways." She clenched her fists. "That's not an answer, Adrian." His gaze softened just a little. "I'm okay, Olivia." "You don't look okay," she shot back, her voice trembling. He studied her for a long moment, then reached for her hand. She stiffened but didn't pull away. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. Something inside Olivia shifted. For the first time since they married, she wasn't thinking about their differences, their arranged marriage, or their cold dynamic. She was just thinking about him. And she realized, with terrifying clarity, she never wanted to lose him. Olivia sat by Adrian's bedside for hours, watching him sleep. His usually strong, composed face looked vulnerable under the hospital's dim lighting. His breathing was steady, but she couldn't stop replaying the moment she had seen him lying there, injured and weak. It had shaken something deep inside her. She wasn't just concerned for him. She was terrified at the thought of losing him. When Adrian stirred, his dark eyes slowly opening, Olivia sat up. "You're still here," he murmured, his voice groggy. "Obviously," she said, crossing her arms. "Someone has to make sure you don't die on me." A slow smirk tugged at his lips. "I already told you. I'm fine." "Stop saying that," Olivia snapped, surprising them both. You got injured. You could have... She stopped herself, pressing her lips together. Adrian watched her carefully. You were really scared, weren't you? She swallowed, her hands clenching in her lap. You disappeared for nearly 2 weeks, Adrian. No calls, no texts. Then I get a phone call saying you're in the hospital. What do you think I felt? Silence stretched between them. Then, to her surprise, Adrian's fingers brushed against hers on the bed. It was brief, hesitant, but enough to send warmth shooting up her arm. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Olivia's breath caught. He had never apologized before. Not like this. Before she could respond, the door opened and a doctor walked in, clipboard in hand. Mr. Cole, you're lucky, he said. Your wounds weren't as severe as we initially feared. A few more days of rest and you'll be discharged. Olivia exhaled in relief. Adrian nodded, his expression unreadable. When the doctor left, she turned to him. So, does this mean you're coming home? Adrian's gaze held hers. Yeah, I guess it does. For the first time since their marriage, Olivia felt something other than frustration toward her husband. She felt hope, and it scared her. 3 days later, Adrian was discharged from the hospital. Olivia insisted on driving him home, despite his protests. I can drive myself, he muttered as she helped him into the passenger seat. Oh, shut up and let me take care of you for once. She shot back, fastening his seatbelt before slamming the door shut. Adrian raised an eyebrow but said nothing. A faint smirk played on his lips as she slid into the driver's seat. The ride home was quiet, but it wasn't the uncomfortable silence they once shared. It was different, warmer. Olivia kept glancing at him, stealing quick looks at the man she had married, but never truly seen until now. When they arrived at the house, Olivia helped him inside, guiding him to the living room. You need to rest, she ordered. I'll get you something to eat. Adrian leaned back on the couch, watching her. You don't have to do all this. Olivia rolled her eyes. Yes, I do. I owe you for everything. His brow furrowed. Owe me? For not appreciating you, she admitted, her voice softer than before. For thinking this marriage was just something forced on us. I never really tried to know you, Adrian. Adrian's gaze locked onto hers. And now? Her heart pounded. She opened her mouth, but before she could answer, the doorbell rang. Frowning, Olivia went to answer it. Standing on the doorstep was a woman. Tall, elegant, with sharp brown eyes and a knowing smile. Hello, darling, the woman said smoothly. I'm Serena, Adrian's ex-fiancée. Olivia's breath caught. Ex-fiancée? Her grip tightened on the doorknob as she stared at the woman, confusion and irritation swirling inside her. She turned her head slightly, speaking over her shoulder. Adrian? From behind her, Adrian's voice was sharp. Serena? The woman smirked. Miss me? Olivia had thought she and Adrian were finally getting somewhere, but now it felt like something, or someone, was about to rip them apart.